All right, good afternoon, everyone. For today, this is actually our fourth week in computer programming 12b. So, last week, I actually was able to introduce to you the concepts of Java 2D API and pakita tayo ng mga iba't ibang samples or sample program related to that one. So, for this week, which is the module number 4, this is actually the continuation of our discussion last week. And for today, we will talk about some more Java 2D API concepts. In particular, the following topics na nandito sa module natin. So, I want you guys to listen carefully and be very aware and be mindful po sa kinocode natin because later on in this module, especially yung sa may written work natin and performance check natin, you really need to have an understanding on how the following programs work. Okay? So, for today, the first Java 2D API concept na pag-aaralan natin is what we call transparency. Now, in layman's term, we already know how to define transparency, diba? So, we can actually see this, especially if you are in the field of graphic design. Well, transparency is basically the quality of being able to see through a material. And the easiest way to understand transparency is to imagine a piece of glass or water, and technically, the rays of light can go through the glass, and this way, we can see the objects behind the glass as well. Now, in terms of computer graphics, we can achieve transparency effects by using alpha compositing. Now, it's the process on how we combine the image with the background to create the appearance of partial transparency. The composition process uses an alpha channel, and usually it's an 8-bit layer and graphics file format that is used for expressing translucency or, in other words, transparency. Uh, Meron din tayong ibang terms sa transparency in which we can also safely say that the word opacity is actually the same with the transparency itself. Okay? Now, we will try to use or create a program that simply demonstrates to you a transparency doon sa mga mismong Java 2D objects natin. Say for example here in the transparent rectangles program, I created here a program in which the transparency of colors in the rectangles are increasing. So, siguro dito, yung transparency neto is around 10% and so on. So, I will introduce to you some particular methods that you need to understand and have. Okay, so let's open our IntelliJ and let's go ahead and proceed with the transparency program. Okay, so we will actually start our coding here by simply creating a Java program title with the title of Transparent Rectangles X Java. So, yan, public class Transparent Rectangles X. Yan. Tapos, let's have here the main method already. This is actually not your first time creating this kind of code, diba? Especially on this part of the CP12b, I am assuming na nakinig kayo last week and we already know how to fully implement the following object-oriented programming concepts na pinag-aralan natin since last week. Okay, so we will actually start by simply extending the public class here. And extend natin using the JFrame. And let's not forget to import the following packages. So number one, we have to import here what we call the alpha composite. And this is actually the main package na gagamitin natin in order for us to apply some transparency effects sa mismong rectangle natin. We also have here the color in which you will identify the color of the rectangle itself. Meron din tayo dito out, the event queue. Yan. We also have here what we call the graphics. And java.out the graphics. Tapos java.out the graphics 2D. And the javax.swing, which is the JFrame. And the javax.swing, which is the JPanel. Alright, so far we only used here the JFrame. So inside the JFrame, is actually where we will create the event queue, in which I think nagawa na natin to last week, diba? So, hindi na to bago sa inyo. We can go ahead and use here the new runnable method with the public void run. And now, inside the public void run is where we will instantiate the object transparent rectangles x. And let's name that as x. New transparent rectangles x. And let's make sure to set the visibility into true. So let's try to run this program if something will happen. Natin ha. Ayan, so yes, apparently, of course, may nangyari po. Kasi nga, we actually set the J-frame, the visibility of the J-frame into true. But then, there is, or we didn't actually specify the size of the J-frame itself. Alright, so next here is where we will try to work on with the object or the public class transparent rectangles x. So, inside the public transparent x na class natin, yan, let's declare here, or let's create here, the constructor, in which the constructor later on will call the initUI method, in which I introduced to you last week. The initUI method is actually where most of the properties of your J-frame will be added. So since you want that to be accessed only in this class, let's create, or let's make that as private, initUI, tapos ganyan. Tapos, since meron tayo ditong J-frame, ayan, so naka J-frame tayo, no? So, since naka J-frame tayo, I would like to add here a new surface, and I'll name this surface as transparent. I actually instantiated this. This is a new object, by the way. Yan. So, in-instantiate ko siya. So, basically, this is a panel in which we will extend later on. Let's set the title. Set title transparent rectangles. Tapos, let's set the location relative to, of course, null, and the default close operation into JFrame that exit and close. Alright, so you're experiencing an error here. It's actually because hindi mo pa siya totally ginagawa. So on this part, we will now create this instantiated object that we instantiated earlier. So here, since nasa loob tayo ng transparent rectangles x, we cannot declare a public class. But instead, we can just simply proceed with the class and the name here, which is actually the same. Diba? So, we will extend here the JPanel, in which we already know that the JPanel will be added directly to your JFrame. Okay, so alam natin to, diba? So, transparent extends transparent. So this is a class, so no need for open and close parenthesis. So next is, okay, let's go ahead and use here the public void paint component. Yan, yung graphics G natin, in which inside the paint component is where we will now be calling all the components inside the graphics and will eventually be converted into a graphics 2D. So tatawagin natin to ulit tong si do drawing G. Yan. So pansin nyo, error pa yan kasi wala pa yan totally laman or hindi pa natin siya kini-create. Let's try to override this. Yan. And let's try to create here the do drawing method that we have. So using the graphics G. So that's a parameter. Sabihin, binabato natin itong all of the components of graphics will now be thrown in this method, in which will eventually be casted into the graphics 2D. So, kukunin lahat ni graphics 2D yung components ni graphics and will eventually be converted into a graphics 2D. So, yung program natin magiging graphics 2D na yan. Diba? So, try nga natin siyang i-run if something will happen. So, once we run that, of course, wala pa, di ba? And, let's see. I think may nakalimutan tayo dito sa may set size, diba? So, transparent rectangles, that set size here, up onto 590 to 120, for example. Let's try to run that. Dapat makita na natin tong size na to. Ayan. So, nakikita natin, no? So, we are trying to create a program that looks something like this, in which we'll simply apply the transparency of an object. So, gawa tayo dito. I would like to set the color, the set paint color, as color.blue. So, gusto ko siya blue. Ayan. So, we actually set the color into blue. So, meron pa tayo ditong error na nakikita as of the moment. So, let's try to fix this later on. Tignan natin kung paano to. So, since we already set the paint, let's now create or right here the dispose para at least maging safe na yan mamayang konti. Diba? So, meron pang error. And, now, on this part, since meron tayo kasi ditong 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 rectangles, I would like here to create a for loop that simply creates automatic 10 different rectangles. So, starting from 1 and ending up to 10, tapos the iteration will be plus plus for every, diba? So, for every rectangle na isinusulat mo, ganyan ang mangyayari. So, for every rectangle here, I would like now to declare a variable alpha, which is in float, and multiply the value of whatever is, or whatever the value of I here into the 0.1f. Later on, makikita natin kung bakit nga ben 0.1f. Okay? So, alpha is I. So, ibig sabihin 1 multiplied by 0.1. Tapos later on, 2 multiplied by 0.1. 3 multiplied by 0.1. And so on. So, magiging ganun siya. Now, this is actually where we will now use the alpha composite object. Yan. And we will name this as alcom, for example. Tapos, I would like to use here the alpha composite get instance with a method alpha composite src underscore over, which is alpha. Ano yung alpha na yan? The value of the transparency itself. Yan. So, ganun po yan. So, dito, iset natin ngayon yung composite niya. Set composite as outcome. Yan. And lastly, let's go ahead and fill the rectangle into 50 multiplied by the I. Ibig sabihin na ito, fill rectangle. Ibig sabihin, nagkikreate tayo ng rectangle with the respective position. However, the Y value is actually still the same. Nag-iiba lang yan dito. Yung position ng X niya. So, dito, yung Y, constant yan kasi naka-straight naman ganyan yan. So, 40 and 40. So, ganun siya. Alright, so since we are experiencing some errors here, ano natin siya? Try natin siyang i-fix. So, first of all, I think the problem here is the set paint. Kasi naka-graphics G2D lang siya. This should be at least graphics 2D. Tapos, ito graphics 2D g.create. Okay na yan. Now, napansin nyo nung graphics 2D na to, nawala yung error dito sa set paint color and dito sa set composite. So, ibig sabihin kasi earlier, yung graphics object lang. Dito, ganyan lang muna siya. For now, let's try to run that. Ayan po. So, kung napansin natin yung transparency nito, no? So, this actually starts from the transparency of 1 multiplied by 0.1 na value, which is actually 1.1 na alpha. Tapos, following by 2.1, 3.1, and so on. So, this is actually the percentage eh. So, yung 0.1 dito simply means that the transparency here is only 10%. So, 1.1 is actually in Java is around 10%. 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, and so on. So, that's actually how you create a Java program with transparency effects. So, dito po yan. Napaka-importante na alam natin kung paano i-gamitin si alpha composite. So this is given. Ito alpha composite that get instance na yan. So lagi po natin ginagamit yan. Now if you would like to create or just simply modify this program, you can just simply play around with the values here. Tingnan natin. So what if ginawa natin tong 1F? Diba? So kung 1F yan, walang nagpakita, di ba? So kung 0.05, kalahati ng 1. Ayan. So in theory, the float value here will be or will actually determine the transparency effect of your rectangles. So 0.5 meaning 5% that. So 5 ang magiging ano dyan, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 25, 40, 45, 50. So, ganyan yan. Okay? So make sure to at least take a screenshot of this code na nakikita natin para magamit ninyo in or for your activity. Yan. Alright, so the next part of the program or the module here is actually where we will create create a Java program that demonstrates how to fade out. Okay? This image here na nakikita nyo, hindi lang po ito nagpapakita ng maayos, pero in reality, once we run this, the image will be completely invisible. Yan, magta-transparent siya until maging invisible siya. Pero before we proceed with this program or demo program here, I think it's a must for us to skip that and proceed first with the discussion on how to display an image first. Alright, so let's go ahead and this is very easy lang naman. So let's try to create here a Java program that displays an image. So just like yung ginawa natin noon, nag-display na tayo ng image using a particular path, it's important for us to determine kung saan nga ba natin ipipaste yung path or yung image mo. Alright, so let's open or let's go back again dito sa IntelliJ natin. Ayan, so let's create here a Java class with a name of displayImageX. Ayan. So public class displayImageX. Now, extend ulit natin si JFrame. Ayan. Tapos, lagyan na natin agad si main method. Dito. Ayan. So, the next thing that we have to do here is, of course, we need to import the following packages. Import java.out first. I would like to use here what we call the dimension in order for us to determine the dimension of the image itself. Now, gamitin din natin si event queue as usual. Gamitin din natin dito si out.graphics and graphics 2D, for example. Yan. Tapos, gamitin din natin dito si image. That's very important. Do not forget to use that. Tapos, si javax.swing, we have what we call the image icon. Yan. Tapos, JFrame and si JPanel. Next is for us to work on here sa my main method natin. We can do that by simply creating our event queue. And event queue.invokelater new runnable. Ayan. And here we will now instantiate the object displayImageX, which is actually the same name with the class that we have. So displayImageX here, new displayImageX, tapos x.setVisible into 2. So we already know that this should work for now. Okay, so let's work on with the constructor. Public display image x. Tawagin natin dito si init UI. Kagaya rin ng ginawa natin kanina. Private void init UI. Now let's set the properties. Yan. Lagay natin si JPanel dito na surface image panel. For example, yun yung name. Tapos, I would like to pack the entire JFrame later on. Kung napansin nyo, hindi ako magsaset dito ng size because I would like to have a specific size ng image depende kung ano yung image na ilalagay ko. So, meron din tayong ditong title and meron tayong default close operation which is automatic as exit and close. Now, let's try to take a look kung nasaan nga ba muna, okay, yung mismong image natin. So, assuming na nakapag-download na kayo ng image from the internet, so usually makikita yun dito. Ayan, no? So, see users, in my case, the IntelliJ files are being stored dyan. So, hanapin ko lang yan. Users, Jazri, ID of projects, and module 4. Tapos, dito po sa SRC. Now, dito sa SRC, kung mapapansin natin, I already downloaded an image here with a file name marine.jpg. So, nandiyan na siya. Diba? So, yung file name na yan, gagamitin natin yan. Let's try to copy that. And, later on, we will paste that. So, let's set the title. Bawa dito ang lagay ko kasi dyan na sample is ganyan, di ba? Yan. So, nakapack siya, nakaset si title. Oh, nakalimutan ko rin si set location relative to null. Ayan. Tapos, dito, gawin natin si surface image panel. Tapos, extends jpanel. Ayan. Para na, di ba? Nawala na yung error dito sa may last part na to. Now, on this part, just like what we are doing like from the previous programs, dito naman, gagawin natin is number 1, we will use the public void paint component graphics G. Kumbaga, paulit-ulit lang yung process eh. So, dapat, I think, kung lagi nyo ginagawa ito, dapat paulit-ulit or at least ma-memorize yun na rin, di ba? Super paint component G, i-transfer ko yan, pasa ko yan dito sa toDrawing method. I'd like to add here an override annotation. Tapos dito, let's create here what we call the toDrawing. Yan, private void toDrawing. Tapos dito sa loob ng toDrawing na to, parameter is graphics G and graphics 2D casting. Diba? G2D.draw image. Okay, so this time, pag-draw na tayo ng image dito with the following parameters. Now, ano nga ba yung mga magiging parameters natin dito? Number 1 is actually the image name. So it's really important for us to use here or declare a variable image and we name that as, for example, marine. Yan. So ilalagay ko yan dito followed by the following parameters and a fine transform and the image observer. Just for now, make it 0 and null. Yan po. So sa ngayon, hindi pa yan mag-work kasi nag-declare lang tayo talaga ng image pero wala pa talaga tayong totally ginagawa. Hindi pa rin natin nilalagay si mismong image natin. Because we have actually forgot to place here the constructor. So, it's important na meron tayong constructor, di ba? Dito po sa constructor, tatawagin, ilo-load muna sa image, tapos isi-set si surface size ng mismong image natin. So, meron tayong 2 different methods na declare dito. So, number 1 is load image. Anong ginagawa ni load image? It's a method where you will now, from the word itself, load the image. So, it's important to determine the position or the path or the source path of your image itself. So, in this case, new image icon. Natutunan natin to, di ba? Kapag path, meron tayong ganyan. So, since marine.jpg, I'll add here src, tapos double backslash. So, alam na natin yan na that's a path already. And, next is, we will use the getImage method. Ito, so, kunin natin yan. Alright, next here is the surface size. So, the surface size here is, again, private void set surface size. Tapos dito naman, I'll use the dimension. Yan. I'll instantiate the dimension based from this, ito, package. Gagamitin ko yan. New dimension. Tapos, I would like to set the width. Yan. Depende kung ano yung magiging width ng image mo. Tandaan mo yan ha. So, d.height. Tapos, yung name ng image, kukunin mo ganyan. G.height. Okay. Pero mas maganda po kung sa ngayon, yung get width and get height natin is we add here a value of null as initial value for the image observer. Kasi automatic naman yan later on. Tapos, iset natin yung preferred size ngayon ni JFrame mo. Depende kung ano yung magiging size nito. Okay? D.width. Mali ang pagkakasulat ko nito. Sorry. Marine.get width null. Tapos, ito is marine.get height null. Yan. Tapos, the size of the JFrame will now be dependent on the size of the image itself. So, if we try to run that, ayan, nagkaroon pa tayo ng error in error 103, which is actually, tingnan natin kung saan yung pinaka-error neto. Ayan, so, the errors, by the way, yan nyo lang yung kanina kasi yung error, tawag dito, from the other classes. Wala tayong error mismo dito sa my program natin. So, I think we can already work on this. So, run natin yan. Tapos, ayan. So, whatever the size na nilagay mo dito will now be the size of the entire JFrame itself. Pero, kung napansin nyo, kapag nire-resize yung JFrame, ayan, ganun siya. Diba? So, that's actually how you create a Java program with an image functionality. So, I think we can already proceed with the next program here, which is the fade out demo program.